Hey guys, so as you've probably noticed by now, Shopify has removed the speed score from your themes page, and instead it's replaced it with these three metrics: loading speed, interactivity, and visual stability. Now, clicking into either one of these will bring you to the new web performance dashboard, and clicking further into one of them will show you historical data about how your loading speed has been doing over the past 28 days. This is a major improvement compared to the old speed score system. Shopify has been rolling this out over the first few months of 2024, and I think everybody should have it by now. So in this video, I want to introduce you to the concepts behind each one of these metrics. I'll be showing you examples on real Shopify stores. Big thank you to my newsletter subscribers who allowed me to demo using their store. And this will give you the knowledge to fix simple performance issues on your own store. And it's also just must-have knowledge if you care about performance and SEO. So let's begin. Okay, so first of all, both these new metrics and the old speed score are not exactly inventions of Shopify. Rather, they're all standards that are set by Google. So the old speed score was actually called the Lighthouse score. Every Chrome browser has a tab where you can actually test your page. And basically, I'm sure that you're quite familiar with this circle and this score that you get out of 100. That's called the Lighthouse score, and I'll be using that term from now on. In case you still care about that score, you can always test it at PageSpeed Insights. But to be honest, this score had a few problems. First of all, the main issue is that it wasn't very helpful to non-technical people or even technical people, quite honestly. Even as a developer myself, this doesn't tell me that much about how to fix those issues. Okay, so it wasn't very actionable, but I'll get into that. But the point is that the new web performance dashboard in Shopify is based on the Core Web Vitals in Google, which is also a system that Google is moving towards prioritizing much more than the speed score. So we've got loading, interactivity, and visual stability, just the same as in Shopify. And there are a few key differences that I think you need to understand. So first of all, the biggest difference I'd say is that these Core Web Vitals, they're based on actual user data. The PageSpeed Insights, the Lighthouse score, is just a server somewhere, a robot, emulating a mobile phone on a 4G connection, just going through your site, loading your site, and telling you some things that might potentially be wrong with your site. Could be wrong though. Those things might not be an issue, or it could just totally miss the mark. The point is that these are real user visits. When we go into loading speed here, we see every day how many visits you got and how many of those were good visits, how many of those were moderate, and how many were poor visits that took more than 4 seconds for the page to load. And based on all this data from the last 28 days, that's where we get this average loading time from all of those real customers visiting your store. And the same goes for interactivity and the same for visual stability. It's all based on real customer experience, which is what you really care about, isn't it? You don't care about some score that some robot gives you. You care about whether your customers are having a nice experience browsing your store, buying your products without any kind of interruption. And Google also understands this, which is why they've started to focus more on the Core Web Vitals. And this brings me to my second point, which is the fact that this is so much better for SEO, as a metric for SEO, which I know is a big reason why many of you may be focusing on speed. One reason is conversion rates, the other reason is SEO. And Google has actually confirmed that it's the Core Web Vitals and not the page speed score that is used as a ranking factor in Google search. So let me rephrase that. Google does not care about your speed score. If you improve your speed score by 5 or 10 points, that's going to do nothing for your search ranking, for your SEO. But if you go from needs improvement to good in your Core Web Vitals, that is going to have an effect on SEO, because Core Web Vitals are confirmed as a ranking factor. And finally, I touched on this earlier, but it's so much more simple for store owners. All you have to do now is stay in the blue zone. You just want it to say good. And there are just 3 levels, really: good, moderate, and poor. As opposed to previously, if you were getting a score of 70, many store owners would be wondering, is that good enough, right? Whereas now, just focus on being good in all 3 core web vitals. And the other reason it's more actionable is because of this chart that shows you the difference over time. It's really quite genius what Shopify have done here with tracking various events that happen in your store. So you can see when they've published a new theme, they've updated their theme on this store, and then here they edited their theme and uninstalled some apps. And you can see that here, after they published the new theme, the LCP went from 2 seconds down to 1 second. And then after uninstalling some apps, it improved again down to 0.7 second LCP. So you know when you've done something right, and you'll also see when you've done something wrong. So in other words, it almost teaches you how to have an optimized website. Okay, so now I hope you understand some of the key differences between the old Lighthouse score and the new Core Web Vitals. Now let's get into the details of each one of these, starting with the loading speed, or what Google calls Largest Contentful Paint. Okay, so loading speed is a bit of an oversimplification. As it explains here, LCP measures how fast the largest element on the screen becomes visible. The largest element on the screen. On most Shopify websites, the largest element when you first visit the website is going to be this hero image. Most stores will be using this full screen, high resolution banner, which is actually not very good for LCP. In this case, we have 3 images, but the largest one is this one to the left, and that's going to be what's known as the LCP element. That's the one that's being measured. When that loads in, that's your LCP score. To get a good score, that image, or whatever content it is, it could be text as well, by the way, whatever it is, it needs to load in under 2.5 seconds. And the point is that this is what makes a good user experience. You don't want a person sitting around and just looking at a blank screen waiting for it to load. That's the most frustrating part of a slow website. It doesn't actually matter when the rest of the site loads. In fact, we want the rest of the site to load in later. This is a technique called lazy loading, particularly when we're talking about images. You see these images fading in, that's not just a special effect, that's actually them being loaded a little bit later than the stuff at the top of the page, which makes sense, right? So to summarize, for optimizing LCP, what we're really looking for is 2 things. One is that we want the stuff at the top of the page to load first. We don't want the stuff lower down loading before this. Okay, and on this website particularly, I think I found that this TikTok embed, that these placeholder images for the TikTok were being loaded at the same time as the top of the page, right? When they should be somehow deferred. And then the second thing we're going for, the one that's probably easier for you as a store owner to achieve yourself, is simply for the elements at the top to be lightweight. So here are some tips. First of all, try to avoid using a slideshow like this, because when you use a slideshow as your first section, then you need to wait for the JavaScript that powers the slideshow to load as well as the images. And actually the first 2 sections on this website are sliders and carousels. So there's going to be a lot of code that needs to load immediately at the top of the site that's going to affect LCP. The next thing is that if you can, try to avoid the super huge hero image entirely. I mean, there are websites that use the image and text section, for example, and in this case the image is much smaller, the file size is going to be smaller, it's going to load in much faster than a high resolution wide image like this. Okay, my third tip is that you should use something like Squoosh or another image compression app on all the images that you upload at the top of your website and actually across your entire site. Before uploading images, run them through Squoosh, especially for the home page. Before the product pages, you can actually automate their compression using an app like Tiny Image. By the way, I totally didn't talk about other types of pages besides the home page, like your collection pages, your product pages. All the same things apply The largest contentful element here would be the product image, and you want to compress these images as well. And Shopify does provide some compression on its own, but that compression is very conservative. They're playing it safe because they have to do it across thousands of stores, millions of stores, right? Whereas Tiny Image has, I don't know, either a smarter or just a more aggressive algorithm that can compress those images a lot more, and you can set it to do this automatically. So whenever you upload a new product, it compresses those product images. One weakness of Tiny Image is that it doesn't compress images on your home page, which is why I mentioned that you should run them through Squoosh. And then finally, a quick fix you can make is to simply have your main hero image inside of the container, the grid of your website. So previously, Pastel Bicycles had a full screen image and it was quite large, but now they've decided to put it inside of the grid. And this is actually making the file size like 4 times smaller, and they've improved their LCP from that, as you saw at the beginning of the video. Those were just some quick tips, and realistically, it's about the loading speed of your entire website. I mean, if you've got a bunch of apps on your page, or if you're doing something like A/B testing like this website, then that's going to affect your LCP no matter how compressed and how small your first image is, because those other things that are loading on the page are going to be conflicting with the loading speed of the top of page content. And by the way, if like this website you're doing A/B testing, or maybe using something like Hotjar for user recordings, guys, remember to turn that off if you are not actively using them. I know plenty of Shopify sites that have been running some tests and then they just forgot about it. And those A/B testing tools, those apps, and those user recording apps are going to majorly impact your LCP and loading speed. Okay, so that took a while. Loading speed, definitely the biggest issue and the most common one for the majority of Shopify stores. So that's why I spoke about that for a while. Now let's move on to interactivity. It's not going to be as much of an issue, but it's still something you should understand. And some Shopify stores may have this issue. The one I was talking about earlier, they have an issue with INP, interaction to next paint, on their product pages. And so I'm guessing that the problem is because of their add to cart. So let me explain what interaction to next paint is. It's about how responsive your site is to clicks. That's pretty much it. Google shows this example here where the reaction time of this accordion, this drop down, is so slow that the user is clicking it a second time because they think that it hasn't done anything. So they click it again, and then it closes immediately. So what you want to avoid is basically things on your site responding so slowly that your user will click a second time. And the cutoff for a good interaction speed is 200 milliseconds, 0.2 of a second, right? If any buttons on your site respond slower than that, you're going to get a worse score. So let's take a look at this example. When I click add to cart, let's try to count and see what happens. 1, 2, okay, so that was just over 2 seconds. 2 entire seconds, not 0.2 of a second. And I think that's the issue. You see, on many themes, as soon as you click, it will show you some kind of visual feedback. On Dawn, for example, when you click add to cart, you immediately get feedback. It has that loading spinner before the item is actually added to the cart, okay? I'm not saying that the item needs to be immediately added to cart. I'm saying that there needs to be some kind of visual feedback. That's what interaction to next paint is all about. So it's rare for a theme to have this kind of problem. Usually the issue would be caused by apps. Unfortunately, I don't have an example of that, but I'm sure that you might have seen slow reaction time on something like this, on drop downs or just on interaction with an app. You might have to wait a couple of seconds for that app to actually open and react and do something. And in those situations, you will notice that your INP goes to needs improvement or poor, and you should actually be able to check your INP over time and see how it's changed based on, you know, the apps that you added or whatever changes that you made. And at that point, you'll basically have a choice of removing the app completely, using an alternative app maybe, or contacting the app developers and telling them, hey, I'm using your app and it's giving me a poor INP score. What can you suggest? So that's interaction to next pane. Okay, and finally we have visual stability, also known as layout shift. I'm sure that you've experienced this before on some websites. This is basically when things move around on the page while the site is loading. Okay, so I have a good example of this on this website, fiperformance.com, and I'll try and show you a slow motion example. And there we go, we could actually see this jump in real time. I don't even have to show you a slow motion. I'm just loading the page on a 3G connection. So on this site, you can see that we have this form at the top, and this is not part of the theme, of course. As with many such search forms, it's coming from an app, and this app is loading after the rest of the page. And when that app loads in, it's appearing here and it's pushing the rest of the page down. So let's take a look here in the Performance Insights tab in Chrome DevTools. I'm gonna just scroll through the loading process of this site and have a look. I have the Largest Contentful Paint image comes in, and then boom, you see that form is coming in and it's pushing the rest of the site down. And that's what's known as layout shift. It's when things move around, and it becomes incredibly annoying when you're about to click on something and then that item moves away from your mouse. I'm sure that might have happened to you once, and you end up clicking on something else, right? And so CLS, layout shift, is measured not in seconds, obviously. A score of 1 would be if the entire page jumped. So like if we're going from the very top to the very bottom, something got shifted all the way. Which is extremely rare. So in this case, on this site, the layout shift is 0.5. That means half of the height of the page was moved when this loaded in. And that's a pretty bad score for layout shift. And here we have a less extreme example, a more realistic one, but they're still getting a score of 0.11, so needs improvement. And here we can see that the announcement bar is loading in after the rest of the page already begins to load. So in the beginning, we've got the menu and everything at the top, and then that announcement bar is loaded in with JavaScript. It's not originally part of the page, it's injected, and that's why it's pushing the rest of the site down, and it's resulting in a score of 0.11, and 0.1 is the cutoff for good. And really, this should be quite easy to fix by simply reserving some space for whatever you're going to load in by putting in a placeholder element or something like that. But you do need to work with the developer to do this. Or if the cause is an app, like here, then you should either talk to the app developers, tell them this is happening, and they might be able to suggest something. Or you can simply place this app section somewhere lower on the page, and then you won't have that issue, right? If you had this section somewhere that isn't part of your above the scroll content, then all of this would load first, and that form would load in later, and that would be totally fine. And that's a super quick and easy way to fix your layout shift. So yeah, layout shift might be something that you need to work with a developer to fix, but I think that for most developers it would be extremely easy to fix. That's the good news about layout shift. Okay guys, by now I think you understand a lot of the basics, a lot of the goals at least of web performance optimization for Shopify. Last thing I want to talk about is if you're going to be hiring someone to help you with speed optimization, you have to be careful and you have to be wise about this, because to be honest, the SEO and speed industry can be a little bit scammy. In fact, there's an article by Shopify themselves titled "Don't Get Scammed by Fake Performance Experts and Apps." And to summarize this in a couple of sentences, it was about people mostly on Fiverr offering a very cheap speed optimization service, $20 or $50, and practically overnight you would have a better score in Page Speed Insights or in GT metrics. And what they were doing was copy-pasting a script that would basically cheat on these tests by not loading half of your website. And that's just not the way to do it. That's not actually making your store faster, it's just cheating the tests, okay? And it's not going to cheat the core web vitals, by the way. And the same thing was being done by some apps. I'd say be cautious of apps that simply have a button that says speed up my store with no explanation of how. Tiny Image, for example, actually talks about how they're going to speed up your store. Optimizing images, asset preloading, script control, lazy loading. These are legitimate ways of speeding up a store, but some apps simply have a button that says speed up my store or boost my store, and it's like, what does that do? It's not clear. The bottom line is that there's no coding magic that can speed up your store. Whether you use an app, whether you work with a developer, it should be a conversation with you. There are certain business decisions to be made, removing apps maybe, or moving them to other pages and making design changes as well. So realistically, the pricing should be something like this, as on speedbooster.com. This is a company that I would actually recommend. Their pricing seems realistic. They're very transparent about the exact services that they provide. And I used to read their blog actually, which is why I'm recommending them. I think they know what they're talking about. They used to do various tests like adding apps or making design changes to a certain store and then comparing the before and after and testing the speed results and things like that. If you want to try them out, I'd really appreciate if you use my link. It's an affiliate link. It'll give me a small commission, but I've told you my reasons for recommending them. As far as I know, you can also reach out to the official Shopify web performance team, but it seems to me that it's more like for enterprise level sites, because if I understand correctly, they have a small team and I think it would be expensive. But I don't know, maybe you could reach out to them as well. That's all for this video, guys. There will be more videos on this topic coming soon, so make sure you hit the bell icon if you don't want to miss any of that. Also subscribe to my newsletter because I sometimes send out tips, and leave a comment if you have any questions. Good luck and see you next time.